March 14, 1961, 2:15 p.m., St. Philip's Church, Harlem. 400 people packed into the pews. Black suits, black dresses, black veils. The whole neighborhood came out to bury Clarence Slick Patterson, one of Bumpy Johnson's oldest friends. A man who ran Bumpy's gambling houses for 12 years. A man who died with 2 bullets in his chest on a Tuesday night, and everybody knew who was responsible, but nobody could prove it. The organ was playing low and slow. Women were crying. The preacher was reading from Psalms. Children sat still in their Sunday clothes, not understanding why their mothers were shaking. The smell of flowers and candle wax hung heavy in the air. Death had a smell in Harlem, and everybody in that church knew it. And right there in the 3rd row, sitting shoulder to shoulder like old friends, were 2 men who had no business being that close to each other. Bumpy Johnson, and the man who ordered the hit. His name was Ray Caldwell. He sat in that pew with his hands folded, his head bowed, playing the part of a grieving friend. But under his suit jacket, his heart was beating so fast he could barely breathe, because Bumpy Johnson had just sat down next to him, uninvited, unannounced, close enough that their elbows touched, close enough that Ray could smell the cigar smoke still clinging to Bumpy's charcoal suit. The preacher kept talking. The choir started singing, and that's when Bumpy leaned over, put his lips close to Ray's ear, and whispered 6 words that made a grown man's blood turn to ice. Ray Caldwell stood up in the middle of the service, walked out of that church, and left Harlem before the body was in the ground. Didn't say goodbye to anyone, didn't look back, just walked out like the building was on fire, and he was the only one who could see the flames. What nobody knew, what the streets never figured out, is how Bumpy Johnson discovered the truth about Slick's murder. And what he did with that truth didn't just punish a killer. It rewrote the rules of loyalty in Harlem for a generation. Now, before we get into this, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now and drop a like on this video. We're telling the real stories of Bumpy Johnson, the ones the history books left out. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. To understand what happened in that church, to understand why 6 whispered words could make a man abandon everything he owned and run, you need to understand who Bumpy Johnson was in 1961 and what Harlem looked like that year. By 1961, Bumpy Johnson was at the peak of his power. He'd survived prison. He'd survived wars with the Italian mob. He'd survived every attempt to remove him from Harlem, and there had been plenty. The man was 55 years old, and in a world where most gangsters didn't make it past 40, Bumpy was still standing, still sharp, still running things. But Harlem was changing. The old ways were shifting. A new generation of hustlers was coming up, young men who didn't remember the wars Bumpy had fought, young men who saw his territory and his money and thought maybe, just maybe, it was time for new leadership. These young guys didn't understand what Bumpy had built. They looked at his operation and saw dollars. They didn't see the 20 years of blood and strategy that held it all together. They didn't see the alliances with politicians, the arrangements with the police, the relationships with the Italian families that kept Harlem from turning into a war zone every other weekend. They just saw an old man sitting on a pile of money and figured they could take it. Bumpy didn't rule Harlem the way most people think gangsters rule. He didn't walk around with a crew of armed men. He didn't threaten people on the corner. He ruled through something much more powerful than fear. He ruled through service. When families in Harlem couldn't afford to heat their apartments in winter, Bumpy paid the oil man. When kids needed school supplies, Bumpy sent boxes of notebooks and pencils to the churches. When a black business owner got shaken down by dirty cops, one phone call to Bumpy and the problem disappeared. When old folks got evicted by landlords who didn't care whether they lived or died, Bumpy made one visit to that landlord's office, and suddenly the eviction notice went away and the building got a new boiler. The community didn't just respect Bumpy Johnson. They protected him. They were his eyes, his ears, his army, and that's what made him impossible to beat. See, that's the part the young hustlers never understood. You could shoot Bumpy. You could poison him. You could bomb his car. But the second you did, 5,000 people in Harlem would know your name before sunrise. Every barber, every cab driver, every church lady, every kid on every corner would be looking for you. Bumpy's real protection wasn't a bulletproof vest. It was an entire neighborhood that loved him. But there was a crack forming in Bumpy's empire, and it started with a man named Ray Caldwell. Ray was 34 years old, sharp dresser, smooth talker, dangerous when he needed to be. He'd grown up in Harlem, came up through the streets the hard way, started running errands for numbers men when he was 12. By 16, he was collecting bets. By 22, he had his own small crew. By 1960, Ray had built himself a small operation running numbers on the east side of the neighborhood. Nothing huge, but profitable. The problem was, Ray wanted more. A lot more. Ray had a reputation for being patient and cold. He never made a move without thinking 3 steps ahead. He studied people the way a chess player studies the board. He watched, he waited, he found the right moment, and then he struck. People who knew Ray said he never raised his voice, never lost his temper. He just smiled, nodded, and did whatever he'd already decided to do. Ray looked at Bumpy's operation and saw everything he wanted. The gambling houses, the numbers racket, the political connections, the respect. But between Ray and all of that stood one obstacle: Bumpy's inner circle. The men who ran Bumpy's daily operations, the men who collected the money, managed the houses, and kept everything running smooth. And the most important man in that circle was Clarence "Slick" Patterson. Now, to understand why what happened next mattered so much, you need to understand who Slick was to Bumpy. This wasn't just business. This was brotherhood. Bumpy and Slick had a bond that went back to when they were kids running the streets barefoot, stealing apples from the fruit stand on 135th. They'd grown up poor together. They'd fought together. They'd buried friends together. When Bumpy went to prison, Slick was the one who made sure Bumpy's wife had groceries every week. When Bumpy came home, Slick was standing at the gate waiting for him. That's the kind of loyalty money can't buy, the kind you build over decades of shared pain and shared survival. Slick had been with Bumpy since the late 1940s. He was Bumpy's operations man. He ran 5 gambling houses across Harlem, handled payoffs to the police, managed the runners who collected numbers bets every morning, and reported directly to Bumpy every Friday night. If you wanted to understand how Bumpy's money machine worked, you went through Slick. Slick was also one of Bumpy's closest friends. They'd grown up on the same block. They'd been through wars together. Bumpy trusted Slick with his money, his secrets, and his life. In Harlem, that kind of trust was rare. In the underworld, it was almost unheard of. Ray Caldwell understood something that most young hustlers missed. You don't go after the king directly. You go after the pieces around the king. Remove the right piece, and the whole board changes. And the piece Ray wanted to remove was Slick Patterson. Ray's thinking was simple. Kill Slick, create chaos in Bumpy's operation, and step in to fill the gap. With Slick gone, someone would need to run those gambling houses. Someone would need to manage those runners. And Ray planned to be that someone. He figured if he played it right, he could slide into Bumpy's circle and slowly take over from the inside. It was a smart plan, cold and calculated, and on the night of March 9th, 1961, Ray put it into motion. Ray didn't pull the trigger himself. He was too smart for that. He hired 2 men from out of town, brothers from Newark named Delroy and Marcus Webb. They had no connection to Harlem, no ties to Bumpy's world. They were ghosts, professional hitters who came in, did the job, and disappeared. Ray had found the Webb brothers through a contact in Jersey City, a fence named Little Petey who moved stolen goods between Newark and New York. Little Petey made the introduction at a diner off Route 1, neutral territory. Ray sat across from Delroy and Marcus, laid out the job, and watched their faces for any sign of hesitation. There was none. These 2 had done this before. Ray paid them $8,000. Cash. No names, no paper trail. The instructions were specific. Slick Patterson leaves his gambling house on 128th Street every Tuesday night at 11. He walks 3 blocks to his car, always alone, always the same route. Make it look like a robbery. Take his watch, his wallet, his rings. Nobody should think this was anything other than a street crime. Delroy nodded slowly. Marcus didn't even blink. "And after?" Delroy asked. "You go back to your hotel. You check out the next morning. You take the train back to Newark. You forget this ever happened. You forget my face. You forget this city." "For $8,000, Marcus said. "We can forget anything." Ray gave them one more thing before they left that diner. A hand-drawn map, 3 blocks between 128th Street and 131st. Every alley, every doorway, every streetlight. He'd walked that route himself a dozen times, memorizing every detail. He'd even marked the exact spot where Slick usually crossed the street, the spot where he'd be farthest from any apartment window, farthest from any witness. Ray had drawn a red X on that spot. That X was a death sentence written in ink. March 9th, 1961. 11:14 p.m. Slick Patterson stepped out the back door of his gambling house on 128th Street. It was cold that night, one of those early March nights where the wind comes off the river and cuts through your coat like a blade. Slick pulled his collar tight and started walking toward his Cadillac parked on a 131st. He was in a good mood that night. The house had done well. The take was heavy. He was thinking about taking Dolores out to dinner that weekend, maybe that Italian place on 116th she'd been asking about. He was thinking about his oldest son's birthday coming up, thinking about buying the boy his first real watch. He was thinking about the future. He didn't know he had about 3 minutes of it left. The streets were quiet. Most of the shops were closed. A few stragglers moved along the sidewalks, heads down against the cold. Nobody was paying attention to the tall man in the camel coat walking alone. He made it 2 blocks. Delroy and Marcus stepped out of a doorway. 2 shots. Both hit Slick in the chest. He went down hard on the sidewalk. They took his watch, his wallet, his gold rings, made it look like exactly what Ray wanted it to look like. A robbery gone wrong. Another night in Harlem. Slick Patterson died on that sidewalk before the ambulance arrived. His blood pooled on the concrete under the streetlights while neighbors peeked from behind their curtains, too scared to come outside. The news hit Harlem like a bomb. Slick Patterson was dead, shot and robbed on the street like some stranger who wandered into the wrong neighborhood. The police opened an investigation, asked questions, knocked on doors. Nobody saw anything. Nobody heard anything. Case went cold within a week. Just another unsolved murder in a city that had too many of them. And Ray Caldwell? He played his part perfectly. He waited 2 days, let the shock settle, let the tears flow. Then he showed up at Bumpy's office on a Thursday morning with red eyes and a shaky voice. He told Bumpy how sorry he was. He talked about how much Slick meant to the community. He even brought a bottle of Hennessy, Slick's favorite, and set it on Bumpy's desk like some kind of offering. Then Ray made his move. "Mr. Johnson, I know this is a terrible time, but somebody's got to keep those houses running. The runners need somebody to report to. I'm not trying to step on nobody's toes, but I'm here if you need me. Whatever you need, I'm ready." Bumpy looked at Ray for a long time, didn't say yes, didn't say no. Just looked at him with those eyes that had seen 1,000 liars and 1,000 truths and knew the difference between the two. He picked up the bottle of Hennessy, looked at the label, and set it back down without opening it. "I appreciate that, Ray. I'll keep it in mind." 5 words. Flat. No emotion. No warmth. No invitation to stay. Ray left Bumpy's office thinking he'd fooled the king, thinking his plan was working, thinking that within a month he'd be sitting in Slick's chair, running Slick's operation, counting Slick's money. He walked down the stairs and out onto the sidewalk with a smile on his face. He had no idea that Bumpy Johnson had already started pulling the thread that would unravel everything. Here's what Ray Caldwell didn't understand about Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy didn't just run Harlem. He listened to Harlem. Every barber, every bartender, every shoeshine boy, every hotel maid, every cab driver in the neighborhood was a potential source of information. These were people nobody paid attention to, people who heard things, saw things, and remembered things. And when something happened in Harlem, those people talked, not to the police, to Bumpy. Bumpy had built this network over 20 years. It wasn't something you could see. There was no list, no meetings, no code words. It was just trust. Bumpy had helped these people at some point in their lives, paid a bill, settled a dispute, kept a landlord from throwing them out, and in return, they kept their eyes open. They didn't think of themselves as informants. They thought of themselves as neighbors looking out for the man who looked out for them. And that's what made Bumpy's intelligence network better than anything the police or the FBI had. It ran on loyalty, not money. 3 days after Slick's murder, a woman named Dorothy May came to see Bumpy. Dorothy worked as a cleaning lady at the Hotel Teresa. She cleaned rooms, changed sheets, emptied trash cans. Nobody noticed her. She was invisible, and that was exactly why she was valuable. "Mr. Johnson," Dorothy said, sitting across from Bumpy in his office. I don't know if this means anything, but last week 2 men checked into the Teresa, room 412, paid cash, no luggage except 1 small bag. They stayed 2 nights, checked out the morning after Slick got killed. Bumpy leaned forward. Describe them. 2 brothers, dark skin, 1 tall, 1 short. The tall one had a scar across his left hand. They spoke with a Jersey accent, kept to themselves, didn't eat at the hotel restaurant, didn't use the phone in the lobby. They came and went through the side entrance like they didn't want to be seen. And Mr. Johnson, the morning they checked out, I found something in their trash can. Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. She unfolded it and placed it on Bumpy's desk. It was a hand-drawn map. 3 blocks between 128th Street and 131st. Slick's walking route, with a red X marked at the exact spot where Slick was shot. Bumpy stared at that map for a long time. His jaw tightened. His fingers pressed against the edge of his desk until his knuckles went pale, but his face didn't change. Not a flicker of anger, not a trace of pain, just stone, pure, cold stone. Then he looked up at Dorothy. Anybody else know about this? No, sir, just me and you. Bumpy opened his drawer, pulled out $300 and handed it to Dorothy. You keep it that way. And Dorothy, thank you. After Dorothy left, Bumpy made 2 phone calls. The first was to a contact in Newark who knew every hitter in North Jersey. Within 24 hours, Bumpy had names: Delroy and Marcus Webb, professional killers, available for hire, recently flush with cash. They'd been bragging at a bar in the Ironbound district about a big payday, which was exactly the kind of mistake professionals weren't supposed to make. The second call was to a man named Willie Barnes, a bartender at a jazz club on Lenox Avenue where Ray Caldwell liked to drink. Willie had ears like a satellite dish and a memory like a filing cabinet. Willie, I need you to think carefully. In the last month, did Ray Caldwell meet with anybody you didn't recognize? Anybody from out of town? Willie didn't even hesitate. About 3 weeks ago, 2 men, brothers, 1 tall, 1 short. The tall one had a scar on his left hand. They sat in the back booth with Ray for about an hour. Ray paid for everything, cash, left a big tip, told me to forget I saw them. That was it. Every piece connected. Dorothy's hotel guests, Willie's back booth strangers, the Newark contacts hitters, all the same 2 men, and all roads led back to Ray Caldwell. Bumpy sat in his office that night for 3 hours after everyone had gone home. He poured himself a glass of Hennessy, the same brand Ray had placed on his desk like an offering. He drank it slow, and he thought about Slick, about the years they'd spent building something together, about the Friday night meetings where Slick would come in laughing, drop a bag of money on the desk, and say the same thing every time. Another good week, boss. About the time Slick drove through a blizzard to bring Bumpy medicine when he was sick. About the loyalty that can't be replaced, only honored. Bumpy had the whole picture now. Ray Caldwell hired the Webb brothers from Newark to kill Slick Patterson. He paid them cash, set them up at the Hotel Teresa, gave them Slick's route, and then showed up at Bumpy's door the next morning pretending to be sad, pretending to be helpful, pretending to be loyal. Now, most men in Bumpy's position would have handled this the simple way. Send someone to Ray's apartment, 2 bullets, problem solved. The streets would have understood, an eye for an eye. Nobody would have questioned it. But Bumpy Johnson didn't think like most men. Killing Ray would create noise, police investigations, retaliation from Ray's crew, more blood on the streets. And besides, killing Ray wouldn't send the right message. Dead men don't talk. Dead men don't warn others. Dead men don't carry fear with them for the rest of their lives. No. Bumpy had something better in mind. Something that would destroy Ray Caldwell without spilling a single drop of blood. Something the whole neighborhood would remember forever. Slick's funeral was scheduled for March 14th, St. Philip's Church. The whole neighborhood would be there. And Bumpy knew, without any doubt, that Ray Caldwell would be there too. Because a guilty man always shows up to the funeral. He has to. Staying away would look suspicious. So Ray would come, put on his black suit, bow his head, and pretend to mourn the man he had murdered. And that's exactly where Bumpy would be waiting. March 14th, 1961, 2:15 p.m., St. Philip's Church, Harlem. The church was overflowing. 400 people, pews packed tight. People standing along the walls, spilling out the front doors. Slick Patterson was loved. He'd been generous with his money, loyal to his friends, and kind to the neighborhood. His death shook Harlem to its core. Slick's casket sat at the front of the church, closed, covered in white flowers. His wife, Dolores, sat in the first row with their 3 children, crying quietly into a handkerchief. The preacher was reading from the book of Psalms, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. Candlelight flickered against the stained glass windows, throwing colored shadows across the stone floor. Ray Caldwell sat in the 3rd row, left side, black suit, white shirt, black tie, hands folded in his lap, head bowed. He looked like every other mourner in that church, sad, respectful, grieving. But inside, Ray's mind was racing. He was thinking about Slick's gambling houses. He was thinking about the money. He was thinking about how long it would take before Bumpy gave him control. Maybe a week, maybe 2. Soon, all of it would be his. Ray had even rehearsed his speech, the one he'd give to Bumpy's runners when he took over. He'd memorized the names of every numbers collector, every bookkeeper, every doorman at every gambling house. He was ready. All he had to do was sit through this funeral, shake some hands, say the right things, and wait for his phone to ring. The service had been going for about 20 minutes when it happened. Bumpy Johnson walked down the center aisle, slow, deliberate, every step measured. He wore a charcoal suit, perfectly pressed, a dark gray fedora, no expression on his face, not angry, not sad, just calm, the kind of calm that made people nervous, the kind of calm that came before storms. Every eye in the church followed him. The preacher paused mid-sentence. Even the children stopped fidgeting. There was something about the way Bumpy moved, something about the weight of his presence that made the whole room hold its breath. Bumpy nodded to Slick's wife. He touched the casket gently with one hand as he passed, his fingers resting on the polished wood for just a moment. And then, instead of sitting in the front row where everyone expected him, Bumpy turned. He walked to the 3rd row, left side, and he sat down, right next to Ray Caldwell. The pew creaked under the weight of 2 men and the weight of what was about to happen. Ray's body went stiff. His hands, folded so neatly in his lap, started to tremble. He could feel the heat coming off Bumpy's body. Their shoulders were touching. Bumpy didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, just sat there, eyes forward, listening to the preacher like nothing in the world was wrong. Ray told himself to breathe, told himself this was normal. Bumpy sat wherever he wanted. There was nothing to worry about. Just breathe, just sit still, just get through this. 5 minutes passed, the longest 5 minutes of Ray Caldwell's life. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, louder than the organ, louder than the preacher's voice. A bead of sweat rolled from his temple down the side of his face. He didn't wipe it away. He was afraid to move, afraid that any movement would draw attention, afraid that if he turned his head even an inch, he'd see something in Bumpy's face that would confirm what his gut was already screaming. The choir started singing, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." Voices rose to the ceiling. People closed their eyes. Some raised their hands. The music filled the church like warm water filling a bathtub, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. And that's when Bumpy moved. It was slow, almost gentle. Bumpy leaned to his right, just a few inches. His mouth came close to Ray's ear, so close that Ray could feel Bumpy's breath on his skin, so close that no one else in that entire church could hear a single syllable, and in a voice so quiet that only Ray could hear, quieter than the choir, quieter than the organ, quieter than a prayer, Bumpy Johnson said 6 words. "I know what you did, Ray." 6 words. That's all it took. 6 words and 40 years of reputation behind them. Ray didn't look at Bumpy. He couldn't. His face went white. Not pale. White. Like every drop of blood drained out of him in 1 second. The sweat broke across his forehead like a dam had burst. His hands were shaking so bad he had to grip his knees to keep them still. His stomach turned. He thought he was going to be sick right there in the church pew, because those 6 words meant everything. They meant Bumpy knew about the Webb brothers. They meant Bumpy knew about the $8,000. They meant Bumpy knew about the map, the hotel room, the diner in Jersey where the deal was made. They meant Bumpy knew Ray had murdered his best friend. And if Bumpy knew all that, and he was sitting here in this church, calm as a Sunday morning, that meant only one thing. Ray Caldwell was already dead. He just hadn't stopped breathing yet. Ray tried to hold it together. He tried to sit still, tried to act normal, tried to convince himself that maybe Bumpy was bluffing. Maybe it was a guess. Maybe somebody was spreading rumors. But he looked at Bumpy's face from the corner of his eye and he saw nothing. No anger, no threat, just absolute, unshakable certainty. And Ray knew. This was not a bluff. This was a man who had every fact, every name, every detail. A man who could have had Ray killed a dozen different ways and chose this instead. Chose to sit beside him in a house of God and deliver judgment with a whisper. Ray lasted about 90 seconds. Then, in the middle of the choir's second verse, Ray Caldwell stood up. He didn't say, "Excuse me." He didn't look at anyone. He walked sideways past 3 people in his row, knocking into their knees, stumbled into the aisle, and walked straight out the front door of St. Philip's Church. His footsteps echoed off the stone floor like a man walking out of his own life. 400 people watched him leave. The preacher stopped talking. The choir kept singing, but people were looking around, confused, heads turning, eyebrows raised. What just happened? Why did Ray Caldwell leave in the middle of the service? Bumpy didn't move, didn't turn his head, didn't watch Ray leave. He just sat there with his hands folded, listening to the choir, a look on his face that was somewhere between peace and power. Like a man who had just finished a chess game he knew he was going to win before the first piece was moved. He didn't need to watch. He already knew how this ended. After the choir finished, Bumpy stood up. He walked to the front of the church. He stood beside Slick's casket and placed his hand on it one more time. He didn't give a speech. He didn't explain what had just happened. He just stood there for a moment, his hand on the wood, his eyes closed, saying goodbye to his friend in the only way that mattered. In silence. In private. Even in a room full of 400 people, that moment belonged to Bumpy and Slick alone. Then he opened his eyes, straightened his tie, and walked back to his seat. The service continued. But every single person in that church understood that something had just shifted in Harlem. They didn't know the details. They didn't need to. They had seen Ray Caldwell's face. They had seen him run, and they had seen Bumpy Johnson sit there like a man who controlled the weather. Ray Caldwell went straight from the church to his apartment on 140th Street. He didn't stop to talk to anyone, didn't call anyone. Didn't look over his shoulder because he was too scared to see who might be following him. He packed one suitcase. He took the $11,000 he had hidden under his floorboards. He left everything else. The furniture, the clothes, the records, the photographs, a closet full of expensive suits he'd bought to impress people who no longer mattered. All of it. Gone in 30 minutes. By 4 p.m., while Slick Patterson's casket was still being lowered into the ground at Woodlawn Cemetery, while Dolores Patterson was throwing a handful of dirt onto her husband's coffin and trying not to collapse, Ray Caldwell was on a Greyhound bus heading south. He sat in the back row, hunched against the window, watching Harlem disappear behind him. He didn't even buy a round-trip ticket. He knew he was never coming back. Word spread through Harlem like wildfire. By that evening, every hustler, every numbers runner, every bartender and barber in the neighborhood knew the story. Bumpy Johnson sat next to the man who killed Slick Patterson. He whispered something in his ear, and the man ran. Ran like the devil himself had called his name. Nobody knew exactly what Bumpy said. That was the genius of it. The mystery was more powerful than the words themselves. People made up their own versions. Some said Bumpy threatened to cut Ray's tongue out. Some said Bumpy told Ray the Webb brothers were already dead. Some said Bumpy described exactly what would happen to Ray's body if he was still in Harlem by sunset. Every version was worse than the last. Every version made Bumpy more terrifying, and Bumpy never corrected any of them. He let the legend grow on its own because he understood something most people don't. The story people tell themselves is always scarier than the truth. The truth was simpler and more devastating than any of those stories. 6 words. I know what you did, Ray. That's all. Because when Bumpy Johnson said he knew, it wasn't a guess. It wasn't a bluff. It was a death sentence with a grace period. And Ray understood that grace period had an expiration date that was coming fast. As for the Webb brothers, they were found 3 weeks later in a motel room outside of Trenton, New Jersey. Both alive, both unharmed. But both of them had been visited by 2 of Bumpy's associates who made it very clear that their next job in Harlem would be their last job anywhere. Delroy and Marcus Webb retired from the hitting business that same week, packed up and moved to Philadelphia, never took another contract again. And Ray's crew back in Harlem? The small operation he'd built on the east side fell apart within days. His runners scattered. His collectors stopped answering the phone. His whole network dissolved overnight like sugar in hot water. Nobody wanted to be associated with the man who crossed Bumpy Johnson. Being connected to Ray Caldwell went from being an advantage to being a death sentence. Some of his guys went to Bumpy directly, hat in hand, asking for forgiveness and a chance to work under his operation. Bumpy took a few of them in. The ones who had clean hands. The ones who didn't know what Ray had done. The rest disappeared into other boroughs, other cities, other lives. Ray Caldwell ended up in Birmingham, Alabama. He got a job washing dishes at a diner on 4th Avenue. No more sharp suits, no more big plans, no more dreams of running Harlem. He lived the rest of his life as a nobody, a man with no name and no past, carrying the weight of what he'd done and the fear of what Bumpy might still do. He never came back to New York, not once, not even when his own mother died in 1974. He sent flowers. That's it. That's how scared he was. 13 years later and 1,000 miles away, and he still couldn't bring himself to step foot in Bumpy Johnson's city. And Bumpy? He took personal control of Slick's gambling houses. He promoted a man named Oscar Banks, a quiet, loyal operator who'd been working under Slick for years. Oscar didn't have Slick's flash, but he had something more important. He had Bumpy's trust. Within a month, the operation was running smoother than ever. Bumpy didn't just survive the loss of his best friend. He made his empire stronger because of it. The story of Ray Caldwell and the funeral became one of those Harlem legends that got passed down from generation to generation. Fathers told their sons. Barbers told their customers. Old men sitting on stoops in the summer heat told it to anyone who would listen. And every time the story was told, it got a little bigger, a little scarier, a little more impossible. But the core of it never changed. And the lesson was always the same. You can't hide anything from Bumpy Johnson. Not a murder, not a lie, not a whisper, because Bumpy didn't need guns or violence to destroy you. He just needed the truth. And the truth, delivered at the right time, in the right place, in the right way, was more powerful than any weapon ever made. Bumpy proved something that day at St. Philip's Church that most people spend their whole lives trying to understand. Real power isn't about how loud you can scream. It's about how quietly you can speak and still make people tremble. It's about knowing everything and saying almost nothing. It's about sitting next to the man who killed your best friend and making him run with nothing but 6 words and 40 years of earned respect. Ray Caldwell spent $8,000 to kill Slick Patterson. He lost everything he ever had because of 6 words whispered in a church. His money, his reputation, his city, his mother's funeral. All gone. All because he thought he was smarter than Bumpy Johnson. And Bumpy? He went back to his corner of Harlem, lit a cigar, and kept being the most dangerous man in New York. Not because of what he could do to you, but because of what he already knew about you. If this story hit different, smash that like button right now. And if you're not subscribed yet, come on, what are you waiting for? We're bringing you the untold stories of Bumpy Johnson, the ones that never made it into the movies or the textbooks. The real stories. The ones that make you sit back and think. Drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done if Bumpy whispered those 6 words in your ear? Would you have run, or would you have stayed and faced whatever was coming? And turn those notifications on because next week, we're telling the story of how Bumpy Johnson walked into a room full of armed men, sat down at their table, and ate their food while they watched. Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. You definitely don't want to miss that one. Remember, in Harlem, respect wasn't given. It was earned. And Bumpy Johnson earned his every single day.